Hi, my name is Golobov, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the development and design choices of my map Calexi. Calexi is an abstract single-player exploration puzzle level with aesthetics inspired by Mirror's Edge. The map is also heavily inspired by Karoli shopping mall, an actual place in Malmö, Sweden. However, I wanted to create an environmental conflict in order to make the level more interactive and interesting to play. The conflict is simple. The hexagon floor has gone haywire and the area has been closed down for maintenance. To make this work, I created modular hexagon pieces to fit with UDK's grid perfectly, and started to create choke points and puzzles for the player to experience. The player starts in the most abstract area of the level. The reason I chose to make this area so empty and bare is because I wanted to create an impact on the player. It is important for the player to remember the area since it has a strong connection with the level's finale. And given that the player's vision is very limited in this section, I used hexagon pieces to guide the player out of the white void and into the actual level. When the player enters the first room, she is presented with the conflict of the floor gone haywire and the first puzzle challenge. The puzzle has a simple solution, and its purpose is a camouflage tutorial to inform the player how to play the level. The main statue in the middle acts as a focal point to hint the player the goal of the area in order to progress. The player needs to realize that red hexagons works as pressure plates and that these affect other hexagon platforms in the game world. The shape of how the platforms are raised points to where the red hexagon is located, and the reason for the placement of the red hexagon is to encourage the player to get a good view of where the next area is. When the player steps on the red hexagons, it was important for me to give feedback to the player that something has happened. That is why I worked with material instances in UDK to boost the emissive effect so the player becomes informed and feels rewarded that she has accomplished a task in the level. After the player exits the first area, she continues through two small rooms and then is presented with the next challenge. The platforms are blocking the player's path, and the red hexagon isn't visible from where the player is standing. The solution lies in the next room, where the player has to use her platforming skills to reach the red hexagon that clears the path outside. However, the challenge somewhat falls flat, and is something I might correct for future iterations. I think a bigger room or a collection of rooms could give the player a more interesting experience, because a platforming challenge with these assets demands more space. When the player completes the second challenge, she is allowed access to one of the largest rooms, which has a strong resemblance to the Karoli shopping mall. The room consists of two playable sections and works a bit like a hub room. When the player enters this room for the first time, she is presented with the main puzzle of the map and must complete it to eventually reach the other area of the room. This puzzle has similar game mechanics to other platforms in the map, but in this case the platforms become affected by a hexagon that it touches, which make this into a combination puzzle. This means that when a player steps on a red hexagon, one side platform and the middle platform will always be affected. Custom textures were made to help the player understand the mechanics. This platform was added to increase the psychological difficulty. The player must realize that she doesn't have to interact with this red hexagon, because it affects a platform the player don't need to reach her goal. The goal of the puzzle is to raise all these platforms to be able to reach this side room, which gives the player access to the next area. The platforms are controlled by bools in Kismet, which means that they can only be at 2 vertical levels: ground level and raised up. Compared to other triggers in the map, these triggers can be used several times, while other triggers just activate something in the world permanently. Another important design choice was to balance the puzzle so the player isn't able to simply activate the last platform and jump on it while the animation plays. This required fast animations and relatively small trigger spots. Only the platform furthest away has a slow animation, which dictate where the player must start, and the height of the rest of the platforms dictate in which order she must navigate through the platforms. When the player enters the small room, she immediately activates platforms that lead further into Calexi. Then, the player arrives at a small choke point where she has to search the area for the red hexagon. However, the little task also suffers from the same issues as the platforming challenge I mentioned earlier. In its current state, the challenge is a bit too simple. The player only have to make a short little turn to find the red hexagon. If future iterations occur, I will expand the area and create a maze of hexagons with a focal point to really challenge the player. After the player has lowered the platform, she continues through an L-shaped corridor with some platform segments to reach the hub room again. At this point, the remaining part of the map is mainly focused on exploration as a form of reward for the player. Now the player must go downstairs via the escalators and continue to the hexagon room. This is also where the map has no relation to Karoli shopping mall and becomes purely fictional. And as a twist, once the player reaches the lower level, it is no longer the floor, but the ceiling that has hexagons gone haywire instead. Originally, this room was designed as a hub room and have the thematic shape of a hexagon as well. However, I soon realized that this would seriously overscope the map and would require new props to make it interesting. Even though I killed a darling here, I decided to keep the shape and size of the room to add mystery and create a finale for the player. Since the floor is slightly shaped as a ball, I added a flat, well-lit focal point to motivate the player to keep exploring even further down the rabbit hole, and in a sense, the middle became a set piece. I also chose to make a thematic change in the map's color scheme to tell the player that she has entered a new area. Instead of having a dominant color of orange, it is now blue. From the hexagon room, the player continues left from the orange corridor, enters the blue corridor and finally continues to the elevator. The elevator leads to Calexi's final area. Once the elevator has reached the top and the path of hexagons has been raised, the player eventually comes to a white and empty area as in the beginning. It is almost as if the level itself is dissolving and breaks down into a white void. In other words, the area looks like the beginning of the level, and before the player knows it, she has returned to the beginning again. That is why it was very important for me to make the starting point memorable. I did this because I wanted to create the same type of feeling when you're on a merry-go-round. The level was a ride, and it ends the same way as it starts, in a visual way. My first iteration of the level was considerably lacking content, even though a big part of the layout and aesthetics was complete. The main puzzle was not yet implemented, which meant that the player movement was changed as well. In the latest iteration, I took advantage of the space in the hub room in a much better way. The white void and portal placement was missing, so the whole merry-go-round message wasn't available to the player. The hexagon room, the blue assets, and the final area was also added later. Adding them to the map gave a much richer experience overall. Thanks for watching, and visit golobov.se to read more about the development of Calexi and see more of my work. If you have any questions, please contact me at jonathangolobov@gmail.com.